The date was December 17, 1944, and the location was a stretch of Belgian countryside near Stavelot. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper sat in the turret of his Tiger II tank, scanning the horizon through his periscope. The fuel gauge told him what he already knew. The needle sat at empty. Around him, American trucks rumbled past on distant roads, each one burning through fuel at a rate his entire column couldn't match. His massive tank, with its impressive 860-liter capacity, had drained its last drops just 3 kilometers back. That fuel depot lay ahead, almost close enough to touch. The one near Spa held 2.2 million gallons of gasoline, and it was slipping away from him with every passing minute. Years later, during his testimony at the Dachau trials, Peiper would describe this moment with a bitterness that never quite faded. He remembered the smell of gasoline hanging in the air. He remembered his tanks sitting useless, perfect machines rendered helpless by empty fuel tanks. Through his binoculars, he could see the outer perimeter of the depot. Belgian workers and American engineers were already moving supplies, preparing to destroy what they couldn't haul away. Just the fuel he could see alone would keep his entire Kampfgruppe running for half a year. The numbers haunted him. His force needed every drop, yet the Americans had accumulated more gasoline at this single location than the entire 6th SS Panzer Army possessed for the entire Ardennes offensive. It was a mathematics of desperation, measured in liters and gallons, that represented the vast gulf between American abundance and German want. This fuel crisis didn't appear suddenly. Its roots stretched back years, baked into Germany's fundamental inability to produce the resources modern warfare demanded. The archived records in the Bundesarchiv revealed the harsh truth. In 1941, Germany produced 5.7 million tons of oil annually, combining conventional extraction with synthetic production from coal. The United States, by contrast, produced 180 million tons on its own soil, with access to another 300 million tons from allied nations. The disparity was staggering, a 100-to-1 disadvantage that no amount of tactical genius could overcome. No brilliant maneuver, no perfectly executed ambush could close that gap. For the Ardennes offensive, Hitler had promised Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt 5 million gallons of fuel. The German Quartermaster Corps managed to scrape together approximately that amount, but getting it to the front proved another challenge entirely. Transportation bottlenecks meant only 3.17 million gallons were actually available when the offensive kicked off on December 16th. Even this reduced amount, carefully allocated across multiple units, would support operations for barely 6 days. German staff officers had run their calculations over and over, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. They had enough fuel to cover between 130 and 150% of the distance to Antwerp, assuming ideal conditions and combat-free roads. Reality would be far different. Major Joachim Dietrich, the quartermaster for the 2nd Panzer Division, had recorded the brutal mathematics in his war diary. Each vehicle could carry enough fuel for 90 to 100 miles of travel. Antwerp sat 125 miles away at minimum. Combat maneuvering doubled fuel consumption beyond standard rates. The officers had stared at these numbers until they blurred. They were ordered to attack. They were ordered to capture American supplies to continue. The entire operation, from its conception, depended on stealing enemy fuel to survive. While German tanks prepared to advance on empty or nearly empty tanks, the Americans had constructed something extraordinary. The Red Ball Express had operated from late August through mid-November 1944, delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily at its peak. The operation moved supplies along dedicated highways, stretching from the Normandy beaches all the way to the front lines. First Lieutenant Charles Wico served with the 3632nd Quartermaster Truck Company, an African-American unit that formed the backbone of this logistics miracle. Wico's company alone moved 50,000 gallons of fuel on a good day. They burned through 300,000 gallons daily just operating their own trucks. That was fuel consumed delivering fuel, more petroleum burned in the delivery process than the Germans had available for combat operations. A driver spilled 50 gallons, missing the tank opening during one transfer. Wico simply shrugged and noted they brought extras. Nobody counted individual gallons. They counted by tanker loads. The Transportation Corps' records documented the scale. 6,000 trucks operated continuously on exclusive military highways. In 82 days, these trucks delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies to armies advancing across France. Petroleum products represented the largest single category of cargo, enabling Patton's Third Army and Hodges's First Army to consume their combined 800,000 gallons daily during the push across France. What the Germans didn't know as they planned their December offensive was that the Allies had achieved an engineering marvel that made fuel scarcity obsolete. Operation Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, had laid flexible pipes across the English Channel. The system experienced difficulties in its early stages, but by December 1944, it was approaching its designed capacity of 1 million gallons daily. Captain Bernard Williams supervised Pluto operations as a petroleum engineer from Standard Oil. The Americans were pumping 3,000 tons of fuel daily through underwater pipes. The Germans calculated fuel by the barrel, while the Allies measured by the tanker load. This single pipeline delivered more fuel in a day than Germany's entire synthetic fuel industry produced in a month. The pipeline network extended inland across liberated Europe. By December 1944, American engineers had constructed 3,000 miles of fuel pipelines across France and Belgium, creating a circulatory system that delivered petroleum like blood through arteries to every major depot. Every installation connected to this network could receive unlimited supplies, regardless of weather or enemy interference. The fuel depot complex between Spa and Stavelot represented American logistics doctrine at its fullest expression. Depot number 2, positioned near Spa, contained 226,000 gallons. Depot number 3 at Stavelot held 150,000 gallons. Together, more than 3.3 million gallons sat in this single sector, more fuel than Germany had allocated for the entire offensive. Staff Sergeant James Morrison of the 25th Quartermaster Battalion had witnessed the stockpiles firsthand. Jerry cans stacked like pyramids, underground storage tanks, fuel trucks parked in neat rows. Headquarters had sent another 200,000 gallons the previous day. When Morrison asked where they would store it all, his captain simply said to stack it higher. American fuel abundance reached such extremes that when Piper's spearhead drew close, the depot personnel didn't hesitate to burn what they couldn't transport. Over 124,000 gallons went up in smoke. The depot's records told the story of abundance. Daily receipts averaged 200,000 gallons. Daily distribution ran 180,000 gallons. The reserves kept growing. By December 17th, when Piper's tanks approached, these depots held enough fuel to operate every vehicle in the German Heer for 4 months. German tanks advancing through the Ardennes represented engineering excellence chained to catastrophic fuel consumption. The Tiger II's Maybach engine delivered 700 horsepower but drank 2.75 gallons per mile on roads and 5.5 gallons per mile across country. With an 860-litre capacity, a Tiger II could travel perhaps 60 miles before needing refueling. Feldwebel Hans Timmermann drove Tiger II number 332. He started December 16th with full tanks. By noon, after covering 35 kilometers, he was down to half. American fighter bombers forced his column off the roads repeatedly. Cross-country movement doubled fuel consumption. By nightfall, the tanks were nearly dry. Orders came through to keep advancing. Timmermann sat in the driver's seat and stared at the fuel gauge with growing desperation. Panther tanks theoretically operated more efficiently, but barely achieved half a mile per gallon under combat conditions. A Panther battalion of 60 tanks required 15,000 gallons just to move 30 miles while under fire. Piper's entire Kampfgruppe received 180,000 gallons of fuel, enough for one significant engagement, nothing more for exploitation or continued operations. Later, Piper would testify about these impossible orders. He was told to drive until the tanks ran out of fuel, then capture American supplies and keep going. It wasn't military operations, it was organized theft. They weren't soldiers anymore but fuel thieves, and they failed at even that task. The most significant German fuel capture happened at Bullingen on December 17th. A Piper detachment stumbled upon an American fuel dump containing 50,000 gallons. Guarded by only a handful of support troops, who fled when German tanks appeared. Untersturmführer Georg Fleps couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jerry cans stacked everywhere, fuel trucks sitting with keys in the ignition, his men filled every tank, every container they could carry. It felt like finding water in the desert. But even this unexpected windfall, 50,000 gallons, would barely carry them forward. The captured fuel revealed another dimension of American superiority. Each can bore octane markings: 80 octane, 85 octane, 100 octane. Americans produced different grades for different purposes. High octane for aircraft, middle grades for trucks, specialized fuels for various engines. Germans, when they could get fuel at all, made do with synthetic gasoline of such poor quality that it damaged engines and reduced performance by 20%. At Bullingen, Piper's men also captured 50 American prisoners. In a war crime that would feature prominently at his post-war trial, these prisoners were forced to fuel German vehicles before being executed. It was grim testimony to German desperation for every drop of petroleum. On December 18th, disaster struck Piper's advance near Trois Ponts, but not from enemy gunfire. Major Robert Bull Yates commanded engineers from the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion. They blew the Amblev Bridge at 11:45 in the morning and the Sambre Bridge at 1 o'clock, precisely as German vehicles approached. These demolitions forced Piper northward towards Stoumont and Ligneville, away from the massive fuel depots he desperately needed. Captain John Wilson served with the 290th Engineer Battalion. He remembered watching the lead German tanks approach, Tigers and Panthers, magnificent machines that looked unstoppable. But Wilson and his men knew the truth. Those tanks were running on fumes. Every bridge they destroyed forced the German column to burn more fuel, finding alternate routes. They were defeating the enemy with explosives and time, making them waste the fuel they couldn't spare. The bridge demolitions at Trois Ponts proved decisive. Piper's detour consumed precious fuel, and by the time his forces reached Stoumont, most vehicles were running on their last reserves. His spearhead had traveled less than 50 miles from the starting line. By December 19th, Piper's advance reached Stoumont, tantalizingly close to the 2.2 million gallon depot near Spa. Yet his vehicles were dying of thirst. American forces had successfully evacuated most of the depot fuel, and what remained behind would be destroyed rather than captured. Piper radioed desperately for fuel. The Luftwaffe attempted an aerial resupply on December 22nd, dispatching 35 Ju-52 transport planes. Only 10 reached the drop zone, delivering just 1,100 gallons. Enough fuel for perhaps 10 tanks to move 10 miles. Most supply containers burst on impact or fell into American hands. By Christmas Eve, December 24th, Piper confronted reality. He had started the offensive commanding 4,800 men and 800 vehicles, including 117 tanks. Now his force was immobilized. He abandoned 135 vehicles at Stoumont, 6 Tiger IIs, 13 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, and 50 other armored vehicles. Almost all were mechanically perfect. They simply had no fuel. Piper's testimony captured his anguish. He commanded the finest tank crews in the Wehrmacht. They piloted the most powerful tanks ever built. Yet they abandoned these machines not from enemy action, but from empty fuel gauges. His men walked out on foot, like beggars, while American columns drove past endlessly. At the Malmedy crossroads on December 17th, Kampfgruppe Piper committed the war's most notorious massacre on the Western Front. They murdered 84 American prisoners from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. While fuel desperation wasn't the massacre's primary motive, it permeated the entire German operation. Technical Sergeant William Merrican survived by playing dead. He remembered the Germans constantly checking their watches. Officers argued about fuel consumption, about making speed. They killed prisoners because those men would slow them down, and delay meant running out of fuel before reaching their objectives. The mathematics of desperation led to murder. The irony was bitter. Germans killed to save time, yet still ran dry before reaching their goals. The Malmedy massacre became symbolic of German barbarity, but also of their desperation. Meanwhile, German observers watched American forces display casual fuel abundance that was absolutely demoralizing. American Sherman tanks kept their engines running continuously in freezing weather, burning fuel for crew comfort. Jeeps drove 2 short blocks rather than making soldiers walk. Generators powered electric lights, movie projectors, and coffee makers throughout the night. Private First Class Anthony Caruso served with the 39 15th Quartermaster Gas Supply Company. His unit drained old fuel from tanks after 3 days and replaced it with fresh supplies. German prisoners of war watched Americans dump hundreds of gallons into the ground. One sergeant begged to collect discarded fuel in his canteen. When the Americans laughed, the man said they were laughing at Germany's grave. Captain Robert Johnson of the 14th Cavalry Group summarized the disparity bluntly. His squadron burned more fuel staying warm during a single night than a German panzer company possessed for combat operations. Americans measured fuel by the depot, Germans measured by the jerry can. This wasn't warfare between equals. It was industrial abundance crushing industrial poverty. By late December, American engineers extended fuel pipelines to within 30 miles of the front lines. The advancing pipeline represented American military doctrine: permanent infrastructure following combat forces, ensuring unlimited fuel supply regardless of tactical situation. Captain Eugene Smith commanded the 697th Engineer Petroleum Distribution Company. His men laid pipe across the Ardennes battlefield while German bodies lay nearby. By January 1st, they were pumping 100,000 gallons daily to locations the Germans had abandoned for lack of fuel. Every mile of pipe represented another nail in the German coffin. The pipeline from Cherbourg to the German border would eventually deliver 4 million gallons daily without using a single truck. This infrastructure made American forces effectively immune to the fuel constraints that paralyzed German operations. The relief of Bastogne demonstrated American fuel supremacy at its most dramatic. Patton's Third Army pivoted 90 degrees, moving 3 full divisions over 100 miles in freezing conditions to strike the German flank. This maneuver alone consumed 800,000 gallons in 72 hours, nearly the entire fuel allocation Germany had planned for the entire offensive. Colonel Walter Möller, serving as Patton's logistics officer, made a note of a moment that captured the entire war in miniature. The general had posed a simple question. Did they have enough fuel? Möller laid out the figures before him. 2 million gallons waited in reserve. Another million arrived each day, regular as clockwork, steady as the supply lines themselves. Patton's response cut through all the calculations and spreadsheets. "Stop counting," he said. "Start driving." Those words became the philosophy of American warfare. While the Germans measured every liter, rationed every drop, the Americans simply burned through whatever they had and trusted that more would arrive. And it did. The arithmetic of the Ardennes told the real story of the campaign. American forces consumed more fuel just reaching Bastogne than the entire German army had needed to reach Antwerp, but the Germans attacking Bastogne faced a different mathematics altogether. The 2nd Panzer Division, positioned nearest to the Meuse River, had already pushed 60 miles on fuel, meant to carry them 30. Their tanks sat motionless now, visible through the winter haze, stalled before their objective, crying out for fuel that simply didn't exist in any German depot. Meanwhile, the 101st Airborne dug in at Bastogne, faced complete encirclement. They should have been finished. They had no resupply lines, no hope of breakthrough. Yet they never ran short of fuel for their vehicles, never shivered without heat for their generators. The reason was brutal in its simplicity: American logistics. 47 transport planes dropped supplies into the surrounded position. Among the cargo came 5,000 gallons of fuel packed into specially designed containers that would survive the impact of parachute drops. Sergeant Joseph Burelli of the 326th Engineer Battalion watched them tumble from the sky. Jerry cans drifted down beneath white canopies, while German soldiers peered from the woods in something approaching disbelief. Some of those same German prisoners, forced to help retrieve the containers, shook their heads at the sheer abundance. One of them spoke for them all. "You fly gasoline. You have so much you fly it." The question held no anger, only the hollow tone of a man whose world had shattered. The Luftwaffe, grounded by fuel scarcity, watched American bombers burn thousands of gallons simply to deliver thousands more. It was an economics of abundance so complete, so overwhelming, that it broke the German spirit more effectively than any artillery barrage could have done. Christmas Day, 1944, marked the moment German fuel logistics collapsed entirely. Across the Ardennes, vehicles sat abandoned, not destroyed, not torn apart by combat, simply left behind because their tanks ran empty. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had advanced furthest west before the fuel ran out, was annihilated just 3 miles from the Meuse. Major Hans von Luck, struggling to withdraw the 116th Panzer Division, described the scene with the bitterness of a man watching his army disintegrate. American vehicles queued at field fuel points like peacetime gas stations. Soldiers holding hoses moved with complete casualness, filling tanks as though war were merely an inconvenience. His own Panthers sat dark and useless 500 meters away. His men destroyed them themselves rather than leave them for the enemy, then walked into captivity with nothing but their shame. The numbers from Eisenhower's logistics staff painted a picture of such vast inequality it seemed almost unreal. 42 million gallons of fuel sat in theater. Another 1.5 million arrived daily. The German offensive had pushed American consumption from 800,000 gallons per day to 1.2 million. The staff marked this down as a minor adjustment, a small inconvenience. They still maintained 35 days of reserves. The most devastating symbol of German defeat sat abandoned near L'Église. King Tiger 332, a 68-ton masterpiece of engineering that could shrug off nearly every Allied weapon. Yet it was defeated by something invisible, something that couldn't be fired or thrown. An empty fuel tank. The gun was operational, the armor remained intact, the engine still functioned perfectly. Nothing about the machine was broken except that it contained no gasoline. The tank commander, Obersturmführer Kurt Knissel, a tank ace credited with 168 confirmed kills, filed his final combat report with the precision of a soldier even as everything collapsed around him. Destroying my vehicle for lack of fuel. Engine perfect, gun operational, armor intact. But the fuel tank is empty. We are defeated by absence, the absence of gasoline, which the Americans possess in infinite quantity. American soldiers found King Tiger 332 the next morning. Beside the destroyed machine lay a siphon hose, carefully coiled. It was a fitting epitaph for an entire campaign, an army reduced to stealing drops while its enemy swam in oceans of petroleum. German officers captured during those final days spoke with the deadened tone of men whose entire worldview had inverted. Major Heinrich Gersel, the quartermaster of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, was captured on December 26th. He stared at American supply records showing 100,000 gallons per day allocated to a single armored division. He refused to believe the numbers until shown actual receipts with signatures and dates. "Your smallest depot contains more fuel than my entire division received in a month," he said quietly. "You measure in tanker ships what we measure in barrels. This isn't war, it's industrial annihilation." When asked why Germany didn't simply surrender, Gersel's answer carried the weight of absolute defeat. "Then why continue fighting? You've already won. We are dead men walking in empty tanks." Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin, the operations officer for Army Group B, compiled the mathematics of catastrophe with a general's precision. The Ardennes offensive had required 4.5 million gallons. German forces possessed 3.17 million gallons when the attack began. But only 2.1 million gallons actually reached the units in the field. By December 24th, 2 million gallons had been consumed. 200,000 more had been captured by the Allies. The result was complete immobilization. The numbers left no room for interpretation. The offensive was finished before it truly began. The fuel crisis, suffocating German ground forces, connected directly to the American strategic bombing campaign. By December 1944, American bombers had reduced German synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luna plant, which once produced 2,000 tons daily, now operated at 10% capacity. On December 24th, as German tanks scraped their last fuel dregs from empty reservoirs, 234 American bombers attacked German rail yards and fuel facilities. This single mission burned 5.5 million gallons of aviation fuel. It was nearly double everything Germany possessed for the entire Ardennes offensive. Lieutenant General Karl Spaatz calculated the exchange with cold satisfaction. We burned 5 million gallons to destroy their capacity to produce 50,000 gallons. The arithmetic was extravagant but decisive. They traded abundance for scarcity, and in that trade lay the seeds of victory. American combat engineers demonstrated yet another facet of fuel superiority. The 291st Combat Engineer Battalion, defending Malmedy, consumed 5,000 gallons daily, simply maintaining their defensive positions. Their D7 bulldozers burned 50 gallons per hour, operating continuously. German engineers watching through binoculars reported the obscenity of American waste. Hauptmann Werner Kemper of the 12th SS Pioneer Battalion wrote his observations with a kind of horrified awe. Americans use machines for everything: gasoline-powered saws, pneumatic drills, mechanized bridge layers. Tasks requiring our men days of manual labor, they accomplish in hours with machines burning unlimited fuel. The Ardennes offensive revealed fuel as the fundamental determinant of modern warfare. Germany had assembled 250,000 men, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and 2,600 artillery pieces. It was a formidable force, genuinely powerful on paper, yet petroleum poverty rendered it impotent. Field Marshal Walter Model issued his final assessment with the bluntness of a defeated commander. We cannot withdraw mechanized forces. We lack fuel to save what we lack fuel to operate. Americans advance not through superior tactics, but through gasoline. They win because they have petroleum. We lose because we don't. The ratio said everything. American fuel available in theater totaled 180 million gallons. German fuel allocated for the offensive came to 3.17 million gallons. American daily delivery capacity stood at 4 million gallons. German daily production managed 40,000 gallons. The ratio was 100 to 1, and mathematics doesn't bend to will. American refineries produced 5 million barrels daily. The Texas and Louisiana refinery complex outproduced the entire Axis combined. The Baytown refinery alone processed 10 million gallons daily, more than Germany's entire synthetic fuel industry could produce in a month. German synthetic fuel plants represented engineering marvels, desperate improvisation against geological reality. They had invented the process themselves, transforming coal into gasoline through chemistry and ingenuity. Yet despite this innovation, Germany never exceeded 120,000 tons monthly. America, simply pumping petroleum from the ground, reached 15 million tons monthly. Dr. Heinrich Bütefisch, the former IG Farben synthetic fuel director, admitted years later in the coldness of defeat. We spent billions of Reichsmarks creating what Americans pumped from the ground. They burned excess fuel in flares while we measured by the drop. This wasn't technological competition. It was resource infinity versus scarcity. By January 28, 1945, the entire Ardennes offensive had collapsed completely. German forces abandoned 15,000 vehicles during their retreat. Most weren't destroyed in combat. They simply ran dry. The Wehrmacht lost 600 tanks and assault guns during the campaign. Approximately 400 sat abandoned because their fuel tanks contained nothing but empty metal. American forces, by contrast, had consumed 50 million gallons during the battle, more fuel than Germany possessed in its entire nation. Yet when the fighting ended, American reserves were larger than when they started. The logistics pipeline had delivered 1.5 million gallons daily throughout the entire campaign, sustaining the destruction and replacing every gallon burned. The 463rd Ordnance Evacuation Company recovered German vehicles after the battle ended. Their inventory revealed the consistent pattern of defeat. Tiger II tanks sat with full ammunition magazines but empty fuel tanks. Panthers had been destroyed by their own crews for the sake of 100 gallons they didn't possess. Assault guns lay pushed into ditches where they'd run out of fuel. Each vehicle was a monument to petroleum poverty, a physical manifestation of industrial defeat. The Battle of the Bulge proved a fundamental truth about modern warfare. It wasn't decided in the forests of Belgium or in the tactics debated by generals. It was decided in the oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma. It was decided in refineries and production facilities, in supply ships crossing the Atlantic, in the vast industrial apparatus that could move millions of gallons across thousands of miles and deliver them to the exact place needed at the exact moment needed. Germany brought tactical brilliance to the Ardennes. The German soldier was excellent. The tanks were superior in many cases. The crews possessed years of combat experience. The defensive advantages were real. But Germany measured fuel by the barrel, while America measured it by the tanker ship. That single disparity made victory inevitable. General Eisenhower understood this reality with complete clarity. The Germans had excellent soldiers, he said, and in many cases superior tanks and strong defensive advantages. But they measured fuel by the barrel, while we measured by the tanker ship. This disparity made victory inevitable. The German offensive was Hitler's final gamble, and it was doomed before the first shot fired. Germany needed to capture American fuel to continue operations. But American fuel abundance meant that even massive captures wouldn't matter. When the Allies lost 3 million gallons at Spa, it was an inconvenience. When Germans failed to capture it, it meant defeat. The Ardennes battle marked warfare's transformation from martial contest to industrial competition. Victory belonged not to the bravest soldiers or the best tactics, but to whoever could deliver the most fuel to the battlefield. American doctrine embraced this reality completely. Overwhelming logistics supported continuous operations without restraint. German doctrine, rooted in operational excellence and tactical innovation, couldn't overcome resource scarcity. The finest tank crews commanding the most powerful tanks ever built were defeated by empty fuel gauges and calculations that never favored them. Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion that helped relieve Bastogne, captured this transformation perfectly. "I never check fuel levels," he said with the confidence of absolute abundance. "I tell logistics where I'm going and assume gasoline will be there. It always is." Germans counted every liter while we counted victories. The Ardennes taught Germany a bitter lesson about modern war's actual requirements. Courage couldn't overcome chemistry. Will couldn't create petroleum. The Wehrmacht, which had conquered Europe with tactical innovation and operational excellence, was crushed by American industrial capacity. Former Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland summarized the truth with devastating simplicity. "We learned that modern war isn't won by warriors, but by factory workers. It isn't won by heroes, but by petroleum geologists. The Americans didn't defeat our army. They drowned it in gasoline." The vehicles littering the Ardennes told the story in mechanical silence. Engineering excellence meant nothing without fuel. The King Tigers and Panthers, masterpieces of armored warfare, became 68-ton monuments to one simple fact: in modern war, the army with the most fuel wins. The fuel crisis of December 1944 cast a long shadow over military thinking for decades. Future armies would learn from Germany's catastrophe. Never launch operations beyond your fuel supply. Never depend on capturing enemy resources. Never underestimate logistics. The lessons were written in tank wreckage and abandoned vehicles across Belgium and into Germany. For America, the Ardennes validated their logistics-first approach completely. The ability to deliver millions of gallons anywhere, anytime, under any conditions, became the foundation of American military supremacy. Every subsequent American military operation would prioritize fuel supply above all else. German veterans who survived carried the trauma of fuel starvation permanently. In post-war memoirs, the phrase empty tank appears more frequently than enemy fire. They were defeated not by American soldiers, but by American abundance. In the end, the Battle of the Bulge was decided in the oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma, not in the forests of Belgium. The 2.2 million gallons sitting near Spa, which Germany couldn't reach, was pocket change in American terms. It was replaced within 2 days. For Germany, it represented more fuel than entire army groups possessed for months. The battle proved that industrial capacity trumped military skill in modern warfare. American forces didn't need to be better soldiers when they could be better supplied. They didn't need superior tactics when they had superior logistics. They didn't need to count fuel when they had infinite amounts. As German tanks sat frozen and empty in the Ardennes snow, American vehicles rolled past in endless columns. engines running continuously, burning fuel with the casual indifference of unlimited supply. Each gallon burned was a statement of supremacy, each full tank a declaration of victory. The greatest tank battle on the Western Front ended not with climactic combat, but with the quiet death of engines running dry. The silence of empty fuel tanks spoke louder than artillery. German crews walked away from perfect machines they couldn't fuel, while Americans drove past in inferior tanks they could fuel forever. The Ardennes offensive failed because it challenged arithmetic with ideology. It attempted to overcome infinite resources with finite courage. The 2.2 million gallons near Spa and 1.1 million at Stavelot represented not just fuel, but American industrial civilization's answer to German military prowess. It was overwhelming abundance that made courage irrelevant and skill meaningless. In those frozen December days, beside immobilized tigers and abandoned panthers, German soldiers learned the final lesson of industrial warfare. Modern war is won not by the army with the best soldiers, but by the nation with the most fuel. Germany had challenged an enemy that measured petroleum by the tanker ship, while they measured it by the jerry can. The outcome was predetermined by geology and geography, by oil wells and refineries, by pipelines and tanker ships. The Battle of the Bulge ended as it had to end. German tanks sat empty, while American abundance flowed endlessly forward, carrying with it the inevitability of victory.